All right, my name is Jim Mayer, and I got my buddy Victor Broden here. And I have been blessed to play with the Coral Reefer Band for over 20 years. I've also done a lot of jazz gigs, and I wanted to talk to you about why I switched to Mesa Boogie bass amps a little bit over a year ago. There were two choices in my tonal switch. I used to have a much cleaner sound. One of them was I went to a much more aggressive bass. This bass honks. This is the rig that I use on the stadium shows, on the shed shows with the Coral Reefer Band. And this bass is extremely aggressive and honky, and I switched to Mesa Boogie for several reasons. And I'm going to talk about those reasons here and demonstrate the tone that works for me live. Mesa has this incredible ability to have really focused, punchy lows and a really aggressive, character-rich mid-range and high-end. And I love that. And it basically hits right down the middle. I can get real nasty with it. I can get real pretty with it. I can get real deep and warm with it. And any of those options has a lot of authority. It really lays down an extremely solid foundation. The last thing I want to say before I start playing is that this last year I've had more comments than ever before that people can actually hear my bass out front. I mean, they can hear the wood, they can hear the notes. Now that is very tricky. My live situation when I'm out playing the stadium shows is that there's, several, like 13 to 15 at different times, musicians on stage. There's over 50 open mics. So you're talking about an extremely thick mix to cut through. It's very tricky to get bass to cut through that. So the way I approach it is I'm actually very opposite from my brother Victor here, and what I do is I do a ton of mid-range. So this is my standard tone, and the whole gig, okay, for the whole year, I basically play this instrument, and the only changes I make for my tone are the tone changes. I go from wide open to back in the tone, and then where I put my hands. That's it. I don't do anything on the amp. I'm going to talk about the amp, but here's the basic tone I work with, a basic... You can hear a lot of evenness. What I like about the tone is all I have to do is move my fingers back here. It's got a little dirt on the low E. It's just about to break up. Now this is the M-Pulse amp, which is probably the cleanest. We've got the M-Pulse, we've got the M6 Carbine, and then in a minute we're going to get to the Titan V12, which is unbelievable to play with.
I got a quick question, Jim.
Yeah,
you said, just for those who don't maybe do that kind of lingo, you say this is a honky sounding bass.
Lots of mid-range, that. So when I say honky, thank you for asking about that. Honky is 800 to 1K. Yeah. 800 hertz to 1K, and it's the vocal sound of honky is why it's not like as in I'm a honky.
Which
honky.
That's whatever gear you're playing, 800 to 1K is a very, very important frequency. Either to me, and sometimes, which Jim probably do more than me, he likes to have it up. Sometimes I just take down a lot of that. That frequency has a lot of personality.
Well, it's almost like the key to your tone, what you choose to do with 800. All right, let's talk about the M-Pulse for a minute. Now, I have EQ'd the M-Pulse to sound this way. And the reason I went with the M-Pulse is the amp prior to it that I was using was very surgically clean and kind of just had a little bit too polite for me. I really wanted to go aggressive. So what I love about the Mesa is it has an extremely focused, what I would call a footprint, which means the impression you have in the mix. Now, with the M-Pulse, I'm going to EQ it flat for a minute. Now, I'm EQing the M-Pulse a lot, and I'm adding a ton of mids, and I've got a lot of aggressive mid-range frequencies boosted so that I can get that. Now, if I turn down the tone and play up here, it's... Now, if I move my fingers up there, it's... Now notice the sound of the finger going. You talked about the wood. This is what I love about Mesa. And the bottom line to me is when I play Mesa Boogie bass amps, it feels like I'm playing a real bass amp. It's not like, gosh, it's like you plug it in, the thing sounds incredible. Now what we're hearing on this is that's beautiful. You're hearing the finger hitting the string, or notice with the tone all the way off, you get the focus of. It's very quick.
You never get the mud and the unclarity of say a really vintage all tube amp where you want warmth but you still want attack. A lot of people think, okay, Impulse is kind of a more modern head, but when Jim sort of gets his touch to a different place, it can still do a mellow, warmer thing, which is pretty impressive.
Well, the other thing too, I want to say a little bit more about the idea of a footprint on the bass. And what I mean by footprint is interesting. It's not really EQ. It's not how much low end it has or how much mids, but it's how much space it takes up in the mix. And it becomes very important if you're at a club gig, you're going to want a bigger footprint to fill the room. If you're at a really big, like a shed or a stadium gig, you're going to want a smaller footprint because it's going to expand, like add water.
Yeah.
Now, I chose the Impulse because it has a very focused footprint, and I actually love the Titan V12, which would be great for a power trio or a quartet because the footprint is it's like Bigfoot. I mean, it's huge. But what I love about the Mesa Boogie, the Impulse, is the footprint is so focused. I can make it nasty or dirty or pretty or warm or slappy or whatever, but you still retain that focused footprint that cuts through the mix, which is very key. Let's go flat for a minute, just to show you what the amp. This is completely flat,
and that's a great feature in case
one switch,
because people go, okay, you look at the carbine, it's got 7 knobs on the whole amp, and over there you got a lot. And of course those are all possibilities rather than something that makes it harder. But in case you're not into all of that, you just like the basic tone of the amp, you got that switch on or off and you bypass that whole EQ section. And
that is foot switchable too. So if you have a fretless, or I do a lot of upright work also, you can have this switchable for for those live gigs. Now this is completely flat.